Moving on to the next topic of chapter number 3, Theory of Consumers' Behavior, we will go on to discuss about a consumer's equilibrium in a single commodity case. So how does a consumer attain his equilibrium point in consumption of a single commodity? So as the definition is given, a consumer is in equilibrium with regard to his purchase of a particular good when he is buying such quantity of the good for consumption that gives him maximum satisfaction from it. So equilibrium point for consumers in consumption of a single commodity would mean the level of goods or the amount of goods that he consumes or that he buys for consumption, which gives him the maximum level of satisfaction. So at that point is the consumer's equilibrium. So with the given marginal utility schedule, we can determine how many units of commodity a consumer will purchase given his income. So because of marginal utility schedule, we are able to know how many units of commodities a person or a consumer will purchase, given his income, according to his income. So there are certain assumptions that we have to make before, construction of consumer's equilibrium. So assumption number 1 is a consumer must have a given money income. His income is given. And a consumer is incapable of influencing the price. So price is given because a consumer must not have the capacity to influence the price of the commodity, or there is no bargaining power here. Price is fixed and it is given. And consumer is rational. So when we talk about rationality of a consumer, we are talking about a consumer will try to spend his given income in a way that yields maximum utility. A consumer will try to spend his income in a way that will give him maximum satisfaction or that will yield him maximum utility. That is what we mean by rational. So let us assume that the commodity is tea per day that a consumer takes. So table number 2 will help us to better understand the concept of this consumer's equilibrium. So consumer's equilibrium with the help of this schedule table. So in this column number 1, we are indicating the number of cups that a consumer consumes. And second column, we are measuring the marginal utility that a consumer gets. And in the third column, we will talk about the marginal utility that a consumer derives per rupee or with the amount of money that he spends. It is the marginal utility from the rupee that he spends. So again, we have talked about this diminishing marginal utility. So as a consumer increases his additional amount of tea consumption, his marginal utility, goes on decreasing. It has decreased from 30 to 24, then 24 to 18, and it keeps on decreasing when a consumer, increases or adds more tea to his consumption. And we have talked and we have said that price here is given and it is fixed. So, let us assume that the price of the tea is rupees 2 per cup of tea. So, when a price of the cup of tea is given, how many cups of tea will a consumer consume per day, or what will be his equilibrium point of consumption of that commodity, that is tea. So we have talk about the assumption of price being remaining constant no matter how many cups of tea per day he buys for his consumption. So price of the tea is remain constant. So in order to explain this consumer's equilibrium, regarding how many cups of tea that a consumer will consume per day, we need to find out the marginal utility of a rupee that is obtained. marginal utility of a rupee that is obtained from consuming different cups of tea per day. So how do we find out this marginal utility of a rupee? So how do we, obtain this marginal utility of a rupee spent? That is, we divide the marginal utility by the, price of the cup of tea. That is, marginal utility is 30 and the price of each cup of tea is 2 rupees. So when we divide these two, we get 15. So that is the 15 is the marginal utility of a rupee that is spent. So how we get 15 is we divide the marginal utility by the price of the cup of tea, that is rupees 2. So here we get the different marginal utility of a rupee when we are consuming a certain amount of cups or cup of tea per day. And again, to know consumers equilibrium, we have said that to know consumers equilibrium, the first thing is you must find out the marginal utility of a rupee obtained from consuming different cups of tea per day. And the next thing is to know the consumer's equilibrium is we must know his marginal utility of rupee in general. In general, you should know the marginal utility of a rupee in general, which may be depending upon the income or overall expenditure on goods. So let us assume that given his income and overall expenditure on goods, let us assume that the marginal utility of our consumer is 6 utils, and let us say 6 util is the general. So here we are assuming that 6 utils is the marginal utility of rupee in general, which is depending upon his income and also the overall expenditure on goods. So now it is clear from table number 2 that marginal utility of a rupee obtained from buying and consuming the first 3 cups of tea, is greater than marginal utility of a rupee in general. So we have said that 6 is the marginal utility of a rupee in general. So by consuming the first 3 cup of tea, the marginal utility derived is greater than the general marginal utility. So therefore, he will gain more utility by buying these 3 cups of tea. So by buying the first 3 cups of tea, he will gain more utility. So for the 4th cup, that is 4th cup of tea, marginal utility of a rupee obtained from it is just equal to the, marginal utility of a rupee in general, which is equal to 6 utils. So the 4th cup is equal to the, 6 utils or the general, marginal utility that is derived. Therefore, the consumer will be in equilibrium, by buying and consuming 4 cups of tea. So 4 cups of tea, he will be in equilibrium because at this point, the marginal utility in consumption of the cup of tea and the marginal utility of, general is equal. So he will be in equilibrium at this 4th cup of tea. If, let us say, a condition, the consumer buys and consumes more cup of tea, from column number 3, column number 3 of table, it will seem that he will get less marginal utility of a rupee. He gets 2, that is less than 6. He get less utility than his marginal utility in general. So he is getting less utility than his general utility of a rupee spent on a cup of tea. So as a result, his total utility will decrease. If a consumer goes beyond this, 4th cup of tea, let us say 5th cup of tea, then he gets a utility less than the marginal utility in general, that is 6 utils. so he gets less utility. Again, on the other hand, if the consumer buys less than 4 cup of tea, that is, let us say 3, 2, 1, which is less than 4 cup of tea, let's say 3 cups, his marginal utility, of a rupee on tea will be greater. So it is greater than the marginal utility of a rupee in general. So when he is, consuming less than 4 cup of tea, let us say 3 cups, the marginal utility of a rupee on tea, will be greater than the marginal utility of a rupee in general, that is 6 units. So in this case too, his total utility will decline if he buys less than 4 units. Because, why is the reason? Because he will not be taking advantage of gaining net extra utility by purchasing this extra cup of tea. He is sacrificing the, extra utility by not purchasing the, available cup of tea. Instead, he is consuming less. That is why he will be at loss. So it is at 4 cup of tea that a consumers will be in equilibrium, where the marginal utility of a rupee on tea will be equal to the marginal utility of a rupee in general, that is 6 utils. So this is the graphical representation which shows the consumer's equilibrium. This is a graphical representation. So x-axis we are measuring the cups of tea, and then y-axis we are measuring marginal utility of tea and price of tea. So what we can see here is that figure 2 shows consumer's equilibrium. So the curve MUX-PX, that is this one, the curve sloping downward, shows the marginal utility of a rupee spent on cup of tea. So in your book they have given MUT-PT. So I think your book has made a mistake on this. So it is the curve MUX-PX that is showing the marginal utility of a rupee spent on cup of tea. So, and again, curve marginal utility MUM shows the marginal utility of a rupee or money in general. That is 6 utils that we have assumed. So what we can see is that these two curve intersects at 0.4 or at 4 cup of tea. So 6 utils that we have assumed marginal utility of money in general, and at 4 cup of tea these two curve intersects. So 4 cup of tea is considered as the equilibrium point because your assumed marginal utility of a rupee in general is intersecting the marginal utility of a rupee that is spent on cup of tea, that is at 4 cup of tea. They're intersecting at each other. So it is from above analysis what we can understand is that a rational consumer who aims at maximizing his total utility, he will be in equilibrium by buying and consuming at this 4 cup of tea. So we have come to a conclusion that for a consumer's equilibrium in case of a single commodity, we arrive at the following equilibrium condition, that is MUX by PX should be equal to MUM. So the marginal utility of a rupee spent on the cup of tea or any commodity should be equal to the marginal utility of the rupee in general. So that is the equilibrium condition for a consumer in case of single commodity. And after explaining consumer's equilibrium in case of single commodity, we will go forward in explaining the consumer's equilibrium in a 2 commodity case. Here we are talking about a single commodity, that is cup of tea, and in the next lecture we will talk about a 2 commodity cases, how a consumer will attain his equilibrium point in consumption of 2 goods, that is good X and good Y in question.